Hi, this tutorial is for McCalls pattern 7724. It's a shirt pattern and there are 4 different views on this pattern, but the one in this video is for view A. On the back of the pattern it says that it's for average sewing skills, but having made the shirt I would say you need some pretty solid sewing skills for this. But no worries, the video is very detailed. I follow step by step along with the pattern. And as always, if you get stuck somewhere, if you have any questions, you can email me, Yolanda@sewcontagious.com. The video is about 2.5 hours long, but that just depends upon your skills. Find that there are things that you already know, you can just breeze past those steps. Let's get started because it's a really cute shirt and it'll look good for summer. Okay, if you are wanting to make McCalls pattern 7724, you're in the right spot. And for this tutorial, I'm making view A. Okay, and if you turn the pattern over, it says it's an average pattern, meaning it is not beginner. So if you have, basic sewing skills, if you consider yourself about a medium or average, then this would be an okay pattern for you. And then it would have, your fabric recommendations on here. If you look at the bottom here under notions, it tells you what supplies you need based upon which view of the blouse you're making. Like I said, we'll be making view A, but I'll be using the same fabric for both. So with that being said, you go and you're gonna find your size. And I find if I look at the measurement chart, my measurements tend to be all over the place. I don't fit exactly into either one of these. But for a top, I would say I'm gonna do probably a size 10. And so if I go, you wanna look on the back of your pattern here for view A. So it would have the fabric you need for the left side and the right side. So, but I'm making it all the same, so I need to combine the fabrics. So it'll say view A. Whether your fabric is 45 inches wide or 60 inches wide, it tells you how much fabric you need. And then for the contrast, it tells you how much fabric you need. And so my fabric that I have is 60 inches wide. And so what I would do, say for the size 10, it says for I need 1 yard of one fabric and I need 1 1/8 of a yard of the other fabric. So I need 2 1/8 yards of 60-inch wide fabric, which is fine. That's what I have here. And for my interfacing, the iron-on interfacing, you need 1 1/4 yards of interfacing. And then you go down to notions and it tells you how many buttons you need, hook and eye, bias tape, all the materials that you need to make this top. It tells you that under notions. And then it also has a fabric suggestion up here for you as well. Okay, so let's go through and open this up. So I'm going to look up my pattern instructions for view A, my layout instructions. Let's see. So for top A here, okay, so if I look at this, it tells me for top A, I need these pieces for one fabric, and I need these pieces for the left side for the contrasting fabric. But like I said, I'm doing it all the same. I look at this, I need pieces 1, 3, 5, 6, 9, and 11 for the right side, and for the left side, I would need pieces 2, 4, 7, 8, 10, and 11. I'm using all the same fabric, so looks like I need pieces 1 through 11 for top A. And then for my interfacing for top A, it says I need pieces 5, 7, 8, and 11. I need to cut out in the interfacing. So let's lay this out. Okay, I have my fusible interfacing. I have some pins to lay it out with, my scissors, and then I have a tracing wheel and tracing paper so that I can transfer the markings. But you can use a marking pen or chalk or whatever works for you. So let's lay this out. And so if looking at the instructions, because the left side and the right side are different. So if you look at the top, the left side is sort of off the shoulder and the right side is, it has a shoulder here. So what you're doing is you're laying it out single fold. Most of the time for patterns, you would fold the fabric in half and you're cutting out 2 pieces at a time. This way, because they're different, you can see the left side is a little longer. You cut it out single fold. So I'm going to open my fabric up so that I have 1 layer of fabric and it's not folded. Okay, let me find all my pattern pieces. Set 1 through 11. It's 1 through 11. Okay, here is 7. And I just sort of loosely cut it out because once I lay it out and pin it, I'll come cut it out exactly on the line. And then if you look at your pattern tissue, it'll also tell you whether or not you need to cut one piece of the pattern tissue or you need to cut 2 pieces. So for this cuff, it says of the fabric cut 2 and of the contrast cut 2. So I'll cut 4 pieces because we're not using a contrasting fabric, or I'm not using a contrasting fabric. Okay, and when you get ready to lay out your pattern, just be mindful of whether or not your fabric is 45 inches wide or 60 inches wide, because it's laid out slightly different based upon the width of your fabric. So my fabric is 60 inches wide, so this would be my layout instruction. And I already know whenever I make something, because I'm tall and I have long limbs, I tend to need to lengthen the pants, and I also need to lengthen the sleeves. And so the way you do that, if you look at your sleeve, here it says to lengthen or shorten. So that means you're going to cut it here. If you need to add length, you cut here, and then I'm going to add in 2 inches. If you need to shorten it, say 2 inches, you just measure out your 2 inches or 3 inches, whatever it is. And then you can kind of just fold up the excess to get rid of the extra length. But I know I always have to add. So I'm going to cut in the middle of these lines here. And then I just use regular tissue paper, just gift wrap paper. So you can use that, you can use wrapping paper, you use whatever you want to, just to add that extra length if you need it. So I'm going to put my tissue paper under here. Here's my tape. And here's the bottom of it. And I just know for me it's roughly 2 inches. Okay, so that's for which sleeve is this? So this is for my right sleeve. I'll go do the same thing to my left sleeve. Okay, I have all my pattern pieces cut out. Now I'm ready to start laying it out on the fabric to cut it out. So my fabric is a single piece of fabric here. It's not folded as you normally do when you're cutting out a pattern. So you would have selvage on one end and selvage on the other end. There is no fold. So we will start. It's going to be a little different because it tells you for top, for the right side and the left side. So I basically just need to lay out all these pieces. So closest to the selvage, they have piece 5, then it's piece 3, 9 and 1 for the right side, and then the left side, it looks like they have it flipped over because I see the this little pebble in here means that it's the wrong side of the pattern tissue. So I will start laying mine out. If you're doing yours with 2 different fabrics, you want to lay out top A just as it says for the right side, and then you want to lay out the left side as it says here. So you open it up, you have selvage to selvage and no fold. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so let's start piece 5. Okay, we'll have piece 5 here. What's next? Piece 3. And I always like to lay everything out first and just kind of pin it in place before I start cutting, just in case I happen to have made a mistake with something. 3, 9. 9 is my sleeve here. Okay. And I'll actually start pinning this so that I can move my fabric over since my table is not that big. So I'll lay out piece 5. And piece 5 here is closest to the selvage. And if you needed to, if you wanted the blouse longer, you do the same thing. You're just gonna make your cuts in the blouse pieces and then add whatever length you need to. And technically, you should wash and press your fabric before you start sewing with it. And I've already washed it. I always wash all the fabric I get, but I haven't pressed this. But if you were to press it, then it would help. So I'm doing these, just smoothing it out. If I were to go press it, then, obviously I wouldn't need to do that. But that would help you out some. Okay, here's piece 5. So your grain line is here. You measure the distance from your grain line to your selvage. So my grain line to my selvage is 13 on this end. And if I go to the other end, it's 13. So that helps you keep a straight line. But like I said, this fabric is stripes, so I can just look under it and lay my grain line out along one of those stripes. Straight line. Do they have over there? So for the right side, they have piece 1, 6, and 11. Straight line under here. So piece 6 I'll put here, and it says for top A, you're going to cut 1 for the right side, and you need 1 of the interfacing. So I will lay this out, find my line again, so that I'm straight. And then also for the top, they have piece 11. Cut out, but because I know I'm using the same fabric, I'll wait to the end to cut piece 11, which is the cuff. Okay, so piece 11 would be the cuff. And for top A, it says you want to cut 2 of your, basically of the right side, and you want to cut 2 pieces of the left side. So essentially I will need 4 pieces because my left and right side will be the same fabric. If yours is different, you cut 2 of fabric 1, and you'll need to cut 2 pieces of fabric 2. Okay, so we have the pattern laid out for the right side. So if you're using contrasting fabric, this would be for the right side, and then you make sure you cut out piece 11 in the fabric that you're using for the right side as well. Okay, so now I need to go to the left side. So if you are using contrasting fabric, once again, this is where you would switch, and this would be your second fabric choice. So let's see, that's 45 inches wide of fabric. So my layout instructions would be here. For 60 inches wide fabric, here's my fabric instructions. And so remember, it's selvage on one end, selvage on the other end. You still have a single fold of fabric. And you see how the pattern tissue is shaded here? That means you're flipping it over on the wrong side. So when I lay out this two, my two should be back. All of these pieces are laid out basically on the wrong side. Just flip your pattern tissue over. So let's get started. We have the bigger pieces are pieces 2, 10, and 4. So we'll get started with those. Okay, this is piece 2. So piece 2 would go here. Then piece 4. Okay, I'll go ahead and pin these 2 pieces before I start on the other ones. I'll come back and add more pins before I cut it out. Okay, piece 4. Make sure I'm not cutting across the size I need, and I'm good. I think I'll actually move it down a little bit so that I'm not too close to my cutting line here. That was 4, then piece 7 is at the top here, piece 7. Let's find that. Here is piece 7. Move this over. Kind of turn it over like they have it on the layout instructions. Okay, and piece 8. Mark. And these are markings for pleats up here. And I'm just cutting away to get to the size 10 that I want. Another notch here. Okay, and your notch, this double notch, you just cut it out like this. So I went up, across, and then back down. Versus my single notch is just a triangle. Okay, this I'm just gonna set aside for a second because we still need to do all these markings on it. Okay, so just go through and cut out all of your pieces. A couple of these circles, this one at the bottom, what I'll do, rather than marking it, I'll just put myself a little cut. I'll do a little slit, and that'll let me know that there's a circle there, and then up here, I'll do the same thing. So sometimes I mark it depending on where it is or what it is. And if I can get away with doing a little cut, I'll do that because it just saves me an extra step. Just do your little cut there. And then that lets me know there's a mark in there that I need to be aware of. Square here, I'll come do a little clip so that I make sure to mark that spot. A double notch here. Laying out and cutting out patterns is the most tedious part for me. I prefer to just sew, but you know, if you're using a pattern, you gotta do this part first. Where that little square is, I'll just do a little clip so that I know that's a marking there. Okay, we got all of the blouse part laid out, so now you need to make sure you have cut out your cuff. And so once again, if you're using a contrasting fabric, you're going to cut out 2 pieces of fabric A and 2 pieces of fabric B. So I will need to cut out 4 pieces. And you can lay this out, like I have a striped fabric here. And so the grain line, meaning you want it out with the grain. And it doesn't say lengthwise or crosswise. The lengthwise grain would be the where the selvage is, and crosswise would be perpendicular to the selvage. Okay, and because I'm thinking I want my stripes for the cuff around versus vertical like they are on the shirt part of it, I'm going to lay my cuff out with the grain line perpendicular to my selvage versus parallel to the selvage. So my shirt will have vertical stripes and my cuff will have horizontal stripes. And I need 4, so my fabric is folded, and then I'll just fold it again so that I know I'm cutting out 4 pieces at one time. Then just pin this, and this will be my 4 pieces that I'm going to cut. Okay, we got the main fabric cut out, and of the interfacing we need pieces 5, 7, 8, and 11. So let's grab those. So I'll go ahead and make my markings here so that I can remove this pattern tissue. Let's see. This one, I can see on the other side, it says it's for view D. So I don't need that marking. I need this little marking here. So just check it for the view that you're making. See, there's a marking here. So I'll put a little clip. Okay, and that looks like all of it. So I'll remove the pattern tissue and then cut out my interfacing and make the same marks. Okay, and your interfacing, because it's a single layer, because the right side is different from the left side, and you're cutting 1 at a time, not 2. You just want to make sure you lay your interfacing out. I have it with the smooth side on top. So the fusible side is on the bottom. Okay, and the interfacing, the way I have it laid, okay, and the interfacing, the way I have it laid out, I have the smooth side up. So my fusible side is on the other side here. So this would be the side, the fusible side, the bumpy side is the side that you're gonna press to the facing, and then the smooth side is what will show. So that's important because you're cutting out 1 at a time because the left and the right side are different. And so you wanna lay it out just like the pattern instructions. So if you look, piece 7 is right side up and piece 5 is turned over, because you need to make sure you have the fusible sides in the correct positions. because you want to make sure you have the fusible sides cut out the way they should be, because you want to make sure you have the fusible sides correct for the left side and for the right side. So the easiest way to do that, lay it out with the smooth side facing you, and then just lay your pattern tissues out the way it is on the pattern here. So 7 would be right side up, and piece 5, flip it over to the wrong side. And if you make a mistake, if you have extra interfacing, no big deal, just cut some more. Okay, so piece 7, they have right side up, and they have it, you know, laid out. They have 7, 11, they cut twice, 5, then 6 and 7. Okay, and they have it laid out here. Piece 7, if you'll look, is right side up. Piece 5, 6, and 11. They cut one of the pieces 11 on the wrong side, or so then you would just lay your interfacing out the way it is here on the pattern tissue. Then you would just lay your interfacing out. Then you would just lay your pattern pieces out the way it is here on the pattern guide. So piece 7 is right side up. Piece 8 here is right side up. 11, they have that one right side up, and they have 1 turned over. That's if you're doing a contrasting fabric, which I'm not. So what I'll do is, once I cut out these other pieces, I'll cut 2 of piece 11. And then piece 5 and 6, you want to make sure you turn your pattern tissue over so that it's on the wrong side. So if you are just paying attention to this and cut out your facings this way, you should be fine. And what I'm going to do is not necessarily, so if you just pay attention, so just be mindful of the way it's laid out on your pattern tissue. So just be mindful of the way it's laid out here on the pattern instructions so that you have the fusible side of your interfacing cut correctly. And you can see here they have piece 7, 11, and 5. I always have tons of interfacing on hand, so I'm just going to cut out piece 7 and 5 first, and then I'll fit in my other pieces. So mine won't exactly look like this, but just make sure you are laying out your pattern tissue correctly. They have piece 11, 1 is right side up and 1 is turned over so that you see the wrong side of it. And that's if you're doing contrasting fabric, which I'm not, so I'll just cut 2 pieces of this piece 11. Piece 8 is right side up, then piece 5 and 6 are turned over to the wrong side. And the reason for that is so that you make sure you have the fusible side on the correct side, whether it's for the left side of your top or the right side. So if you just pay attention to the pattern instructions here and lay it out according to this, then it'll be cut correctly so that the fusible part is on the right side. And I always just buy tons of interface, and I have tons of it on hand. So mine, when I lay it out, I'll lay it out with the 7, you know, right side up, and I'll lay it out with the 7 right side up and the 5 flipped over to the wrong side, but it won't exactly look like this, as you'll see. I'll just fit my pieces in and then cut it out that way. And then what I'll also do is, like I said, piece 11, I'll fold my fabric in half and just cut 2 of piece 11. Here's my piece 7, piece 8. I have an arrow here, a grain line here, so I just need to make sure I'm laying this out straight this way. So either with my crosswise grain or my lengthwise grain, meaning it would go straight up and down or it goes straight across. Okay, I have my interfacing laid out and I'm ready to start cutting. I have piece 7 right side up, it says on the pattern. I have piece 8 right side up, piece 5 is flipped over to the wrong side, and then piece 6 is flipped over to the wrong side. Okay, and then of piece 11 you would need 2 pieces, and depending on whether you're using one fabric or contrasting fabric would let you know how you're cutting out. So one would be right side up and one would be flipped over to the wrong side and cut. So that's all of our interfacing pieces. So now what we'll do is go through with your tracing paper and tracing wheel, or a marking pencil, whatever you want to use, and transfer all of these markings. Okay, what I'll probably end up doing is using both my tracing paper and tracing wheel, and also my marking pen for some of the markings I need to do. And I tend to put a paper or something down because the tracing paper tends to mark up my table, and it's really no big deal for me, but if it's an issue for you, depending on what table you're working with, or if you don't want the marking on your cutting mat, because I find that the carbon will transfer onto your table, and it does transfer onto your cutting mat. So I always just put down my pattern instruction sheet or some paper, something that you don't mind getting the marking on in case it comes off. And so I'll start with the cuff. And what I'll do is open this up because I'll transfer the markings to the interfacing because it'll end up being applied over the fabric. So I'll open this up. So I'll move this out of my way. Okay, and I'll just put, little markings here so that I know this is where my buttons are. Okay, so here are my X's for the buttons, and then I'll go ahead and mark this circle here. I'll put a pin there to hold it in place for me. And then I'll take my pencil, just sort of scribble out a little circle there. And on this side as well. Okay. Then same thing, my buttonholes are on the other side. Then what I tend to do is take all of these pieces and I'll put a pin in it just to kind of hold it in place for me until I start sewing. Okay. Then that helps me keep track to know that I have all of my pieces. So that's piece 11, piece 8. This is my center back, it says. Piece 10, it is my sleeve for the left side. So I already have a little cut here for that circle, so that's kind of all we need. Oh, and there's a circle at the bottom, so I already put a little cut there. So I'll take some of these pins out and leave this on here so that I know this is piece 10. Okay, piece 2, we have markings to transfer, and just be aware you're putting your markings on the right side since there's only one piece. And so what I actually had to do so that I didn't confuse myself was put it up against me. So if this is my left side, this is my left side, so I know this is the inside that would be next to my body. So this is essentially the wrong side of my fabric. Okay, I put my markings on the wrong side of my fabric here, and then if I look at it, my pleats are folded so that they're facing each other. So I'm going to draw myself an arrow so that I can remember that. So the same arrows that are here, I'm just going to transfer it on the back side. So they're facing each other. So I'll go up here so that I'm in the seam allowance. So I know this pleat goes this way, and then this pleat goes towards that way. So when I fold my pleats, they should be facing each other. So I have them marked out, and then I have my arrows pointing towards each other so I know which direction to fold my pleats. And then if you look at your pattern tissue, that's what it says to do. You fold them so that they're facing each other. And I find I'm having to press really hard to make this show up. And I'm probably off my line a little bit because once I get up here, they're all just sort of blending into me, but it's all right. I'm not flipping through this. Okay, this is my right back. Transferred my markings on the other side here. Okay, and this is my right back that I need to transfer the markings onto. Same thing, you just want to make sure you're transferring the markings to the right side. So with it laid out properly, with the right side of your fabric facing you, you can transfer you can put your tracing paper underneath it, and that way you're transferring it to the wrong side of the fabric. Okay, piece 4 is my left back, and you need to transfer this dart as well. Okay, so I'll just put my tracing paper underneath so that I'm transferring it to the wrong side of my fabric. Okay, I'll go transfer all of my markings. This says for view D actually, so I don't need that. This one. And I don't know what this little circle is for, but I'll go ahead and transfer it. So this is, I already did that one. This is my back for the left side. And then we just have one more piece, and then we can sew. So this would be my right front. And we have a pleat up here to transfer. my markings for the width of my pleat. And so I will go put this mark here because that's probably the center. Okay, the center point here, because what you'll probably end up doing is folding this and bringing the fold to the center circles. So put that pin in so I can see where my circle needs to be. About right here. Okay, and then what I'll do is draw arrows on the other side pointing towards each other. Then that way that reminds me which direction I need to fold my pleats. But it'll tell you that in the pattern as well, but I'll still draw arrows for myself. And I'll do it up here in the seam allowance, just in case this marking pencil doesn't come out or something. Okay, so here are the center points of my pleats. Here are the outside lines of my pleats. And then these arrows let me know my pleats go this way towards each other. Okay, have a circle here to mark if I didn't do a little cut. I don't think I did. So I'll put my pin here to hold that circle point. And like I said, you could just do this with a tracing paper if you needed to. Or just measure and know that once you made your buttons are 2.5 inches apart, or you put your buttons wherever you want them. So finally, all of the pieces are cut out. We can start sewing. But okay, because I like to double and triple check myself before I start sewing, I'll go through and make sure I have all my pieces. Here's piece 1, 2. This is piece 3, 4, 5, piece 6, piece 7, and 8. 9 is a sleeve, 10, and piece 11. We're all set. Okay, and if you look at your pattern instructions, the first thing they want us to do for top A is to apply our interfacing. And so just looking at the picture, that'll help you lay it out correctly. Okay, and for fusible interfacing, you just want to turn your steam off. That's piece 8, and this is piece 6 here. And then I'm just putting my pattern tissue back on it once I've pressed it so that I can remember which piece is which. Okay, pieces 5 and 7. You lay those out. This is my piece 5. This would be the wrong side of my fabric. This is piece 7. I have it laid out so that it looks just like the pattern. Okay, so I'll press that, and then I can lay the other one out the same way and press that one as well. Okay, step 1, the interfacing is done. The next step is to make the pleats in the 2 front sections. So you're going to grab your front 1 and front 2, and we will make the pleats at the top. Okay, this is piece 1 for this pleat, for the top pleat. Let me take my pin out. And the directions say you're going to crease along the lines of the small circle and bring them to the large circle. So you'll fold, basically you'll fold here. These are your small circles. So you'll fold along the small circles and bring those folds to the front circles, to the bigger circle, I'm sorry. So I can see my mark here that I put. So I know I want to fold it here, and then I also have my arrows pointing in that direction. And my center circle is right here. Okay, so I fold it and bring it to the middle. And then my fold line is on this side, so I want to fold here and bring that to the center. Okay, so your pleats should look like this. So you'll have it folded and going towards the center on this side, and then on the other side you fold it and bring both folds to the center. It looks like this on the front, and on the back it looks like this. Okay, and then you just baste across the upper edge here. And I'll switch my machine to a longer stitch for basting. And you just stitch across the upper edge here. And I'll just move this so that I make sure they meet. Okay, and that's my basting stitch here, and this would be front 1. Okay, for my left side, piece 2, okay, on the outside you want to crease along this line and bring it to the center. And my center line is here. Here's my center line. And go to the other side. Crease along that line we made, and then bring that to the center. Okay, and do the same thing, baste across the upper edge. And then you just go press the pleats in place. Okay, step 3, we make the darts in the back. Okay, just find the lines that you traced out for your dart, and I like to kind of fold it in half. So I can see where my dart is. Okay, and you do this on both pieces 3 and 4 and stitch your dart. And make sure you go back to your regular stitch if you were on the basting stitch. Start and back tack. And my end is here. I'll put a horizontal pin so I know where it ends. So that's piece 3. Piece 4, same thing, just make your dart in the back. We made our darts in the back, and then I've already pressed my darts towards the center as it says. So now you want to stitch your front to back at the shoulders. So make sure you grab your, you're putting your right back with your right front, and your left back with your left front. If you're using 2 different fabrics, then it's a lot easier for you, but I'm using the same fabric, so I've left the pattern tissue on mine, just kind of left the pattern tissue on a couple of them so that I know which one's left and which one's right. But like I said, if you have different fabrics that you're using, then it's easier for you to tell. You just match up the two fabrics. And then you're going to stitch them at the shoulder seams here. So here is my piece 3. Okay, so this would be piece 1. So this would be my right front. This is my right front. My shoulder seam is up here. And then I've just grabbed my right back piece. So I'll turn it over so that I'm making sure I'm keeping my pleats down when I stitch. And then you'll just stitch across the top here. And then you can finish your seams. You can either use a serger, you can zigzag the raw edges, you can turn it under and trim it or zigzag it. There's all different ways to trim to finish your edges. So that's one side, and I'm going to go ahead and pin my other side so I can do it. Okay, I have it laid out with my standard 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And if you get a little lost, lots of times I sew by looking at the pictures. So if it's a little confusing to you, just look at the pictures, and that will help you lay it out correctly. Okay, that is my left side, I think, and so this would be my right side. Okay, up next, it looks like we are going to attach the facing. So we'll stitch the facing together at the shoulders. Okay, so you want to grab facing piece 5 and the neck facing piece 6, and then you would attach those at the shoulder here. So my piece 5 is here. And I can remove this, and I also put myself a little 5 at the bottom here, just to kind of help me remember the right pieces. So this is my shoulder seam up here. I'm actually going to trim some of this interfacing away. You end up trimming it anyway once you sew it, but I'll go ahead and trim that. Okay. So this is my piece 5 and my piece 6. Okay. Here it says center front, so I know this pointy end here is the center front. This is the front, and then my shoulder seam is here at the top. So of piece 5, my notch is here. I want to turn it over so my right sides match, and I will be sewing it across the top here where the notches are. This is piece 5. This is piece 6. So that's just the way I have it. This is piece 5 here at the bottom. Piece 6 is at the top, and you're stitching here where the notches are. So that's 5 and 6. Okay, I stitched my piece 5 to my piece 6 at the shoulder seam here, and I went ahead and trimmed it and pressed it open. And then this is my right front here that I went ahead and same thing, I pressed my seam allowance open, and I'll go ahead and actually trim that a bit as well. Okay. Then you're just going to take your facing and match up your shoulder seams. Start there. Make sure your shoulder seams are matched up. And then you will just be stitching along this edge here. Okay, so you are going to start your stitching on this end where the center back is, and you stitch all the way across the shoulder seam. This would be the front neck edge here, and then this would be the front of your top. So you stitch it just as they have it here on the pattern. You start at the back, go across the shoulder, around the neckline, and down the back. And then they have you understitch it once you're done. And now you understitch. And what understitching means, you have your seam here and you want to understitch the seam to the facing. Just like it says here. This is your seam that we just did, and you're going to turn your seam towards your facing and understitch. This is my seam. I'm turning it towards my facing here, and I will stitch close to this edge. And that just helps keep the facing from rolling out, is what it does. And I kind of pull to make sure it's really flat as I'm sewing it. You want to turn your face into the inside and just press it to the blouse here. Okay, we got that done. Now we are ready for step 8, and that is on another page. Put this away. This was page, there's one of 6 pages, so it's double-sided, so that's page 1. Page 2 is on the other side, so we're looking for page 3. That's 5. There should be 3 of 6 here, and here's our step 8. So the piece that we just did, you're going to stitch it together at the side seam here. Okay, we just finished. This is our back, and we've attached it to the front at the shoulder here. So it looks just like this picture. And then you want to come stitch the side seam is what we're going to do next. And your side seam will be here. This is your armhole, and your side seam is along here. So you're just stitching the side seam for now. Okay, and from here you can go ahead and trim your seam and finish your seam allowances any way you choose. Like I said, for me, I think I'm going to leave them like this, and then once I try it on, I'll see if I need to make any adjustments, and then I'll probably go through and just use my serger to clean up these seam allowances and make sure they're nice and finished. Okay, we've done that one. Step 9 says to turn under the lower edge of facing along the seam, stitch across facing above raw edges. Basically, you're getting it set up for the hem is what you're doing. Okay, so here, since they want us to stitch the facing in place at the hemline here, what I did already is I just went to my serger and finished the raw edges of my facing. Before you sew your facing to the hemline here, I would go ahead and just finish the edges of this facing piece first. Okay, so once you've done that, you can turn your facing to the inside as they're saying. You turn it to the outside here of your blouse, your top. I keep calling it different things. And it says to stitch across 1 1/4 of an inch from the raw edge. And I'm not going to measure it. If you'd like to measure, just get out a ruler and measure it. I am all about eyeballing. So I will say that's about 1 1/4 inch here where I ended my interfacing. And then just stitch across that bottom edge. Okay, then you just want to trim away the excess here. Then you turn the facing to the inside. And I'll just use my finger for now to get that corner. And you're turning the hem up as you do that. Okay, and they want you to baste it close to the fold, turning in 1/4 of an inch on the raw hem. So basically, you're just going to do this hem with a basting stitch. So you would turn up your hem, and they say turn it under 1/4 of an inch, so just 1/4 of an inch. Turn it under, and then turn the hem up so that you don't have the raw edges here. So you would fold down about 1/4 of an inch, turn it under, and then they want you to baste it in place. Okay, so the way they're asking you to finish the hem is to turn the hem up and then turn under the raw edge is 1/4 of an inch, and then you are to baste across the upper edge. Now here I'm going to take a little creative license, and I'm just going to skip that step, because you press it in place and then you baste it, and then it says to top stitch along the basting, but you end up removing the basting anyway, so I'm not going to put the basting there just to take it out. So I've already pressed mine up. I've turned under my raw edges, so I'm just going to go ahead and stitch it into place. Okay, so I turned under my raw edges about 1/4 of an inch, and then I'm turning it up again along the bottom hemline, and I'm just going to go ahead and stitch close to this edge. So I'm just skipping that basting step. Okay, and as I get to the edge here, I'm just going to make sure the edge of my hem is underneath my facing. Okay, and then I'll turn and go straight down. So it would look like this. I went straight across and then I turned and came down. Okay, next we're moving over to the left side. And just be aware, I'm looking at my pattern and looking at these instructions, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Okay, so we're working on the left side, and it says to stitch the left front facing, which is piece 7, to the back neck facing, which is piece 8. So keep in mind, it says left, and I know we're working on the left side because we just did the right side. But if I go to my pattern tissue, this says, where does it say? Right side. Sometimes they make a mistake on the pattern, so just be aware of that. So this is my piece 7, my pen, and I need to sew piece 7 to piece 8 at the shoulders the same way we did with pieces 5 and 6 earlier. Okay, piece 7, here's my piece 8, and I will sew them together up here across the notch. That's my shoulder seam there. Okay, the inner edge of my facing here, I've already pressed my seam. I'm just going to go to my serger and finish the edges off nicely. for the inside edge of my facing. Okay, from here we've sewn our facing pieces together, and so now you would just apply your facing to the left side. So this would be your left front and that's your left back. So you're going to apply your facing to both pieces just like we did with the right side. This is your left side. This is the left back here. I'm taking my facing and find my seam here, the shoulder seam, and I'll match up the shoulder seams. So do that first, match up your shoulder seams. Then just line it up with the back here. Okay. And then this is the front of it. You have your notch here to kind of help you match things up. Okay, and you're sewing all the way to the bottom of the shirt. Okay, so once you have it pinned, your shirt should look like this. This is the bottom of it. This would be the front. This is the center front of your shirt. And so the facing is pinned to the center front edge. Okay, so this is your center front here. You go up, this is your neckline. You have your shoulder seam here, and then here is the back. So you have it pinned along the edge here, and you're gonna come sew along this edge. And then if you look at your pattern, look back at the instructions, that's exactly the way they have it laid out. So we're just gonna stitch 5/8 of an inch from that edge and then understitch just like we did with the right side. Okay, you're getting close to the top here. Stop. Make sure your needle is down, and then you can lift your presser foot and turn. Make sure my seam stays open. Okay, I'm getting ready to do that understitch, and I'm just clipping where I have the top corner a little bit, like where the neckline is, and this would be the front of it. I find that if I clip it a little bit, it helps it to lay flatter. Okay, we understitched, and then you need to turn the facing to the inside and press it, and I already did that. So my facing is understitched and it's pressed. So it's already pressed in place. So make sure you do that. And then the next step would be step 14. We're going to stitch the front to the back below the small circle. So that means we're not going all the way up. It looks like there's a notch there. So you don't go all the way up there. You start at the circle here, so the little mark that we would have made, and you're stitching the side seam there. Okay, here is the mark that I made. And if for some reason you didn't make one, no big deal. You can just go get your pattern tissue out and lay it back on here to figure out where it goes. Okay, so I'm gonna pin here, and then I'll just stitch my side seam. Okay, I'm gonna start here where my circle is, my little mark. just stitch all the way down. Okay, and we're just following the same steps we did on the other side. You're going to turn the facing to the outside and stitch across the bottom, and then trim it. You turn it to the inside and press it, and then basically you're hemming this bottom edge here. So let's see. Here's my facing. So I'm going to turn it over to the outside of my top shirt, blouse. I keep calling it different things. You know what I mean. So turn it over to the outside and you stitch across the bottom. And this time it says in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I think last time it said 1 1/4 inch. I'll trim it and then turn it. And here's a tip for making the bottom edge of it curve. Basically, you would do a long basting stitch as they're suggesting, and then you kind of pull the threads. So if you need to do that, you sort of do a gathering stitch, and then you can pull the threads to make it curve. But I'm not going to do that. I'll just go to my ironing board and press it and ease it into place with my fingers. You're just going to turn under your raw edges a little bit, 1/4 of an inch it says, and then turn that under again in order to create your hem. And then you press that, and you're pressing that into place, and you come back and you top stitch it. Like they have you basting it as well, just like they did with the other side, but I'm skipping that step. I'm just going to turn it under and press it, and then I'll come stitch along that hem. Okay, so your hem should look something like this. You press in the front facing part of it, and what I'm going to do is just go ahead, like I said, and just kind of hold it in place with my fingers a little bit and ease it into the spot I need it to be. So I'm just kind of holding it with my fingers, pressing the hem up. Then I'll start at the other end here, and then I can make it meet at the seam. So I'll start at my other end. Just be careful you don't burn yourself with the steam. And you can see it's creating these little tucks here because it's curved. And at the side seam, I'm just sort of maneuvering it with my fingers to make it lay flat. And once I sew it, it'll be easier to do, to just kind of manipulate it. Okay, I'll turn in my raw edge a little bit just to get myself started here. So at the beginning, I'll do that. Give myself a nice start, and then the rest of the way I'll just do it with my fingers as I go. Okay, and I want to make sure my hem is tucked underneath the facing here, and then I'm going to stitch this way and then turn, just like we did on the other side. You might have to go a little slower so that you can make sure your raw edges are tucked in. And if you already pressed this under, you don't have to worry about that. But, you know, obviously I didn't press in the raw edges. I just turned up my hem and pressed that. And I'm just tucking in my raw edges as I sew. Okay, where are we? Step 17. Here is the back seam. So what it's telling you to do is open up the back neck facing, and you're stitching the neck facing and the back seam in one continuous seam. And just be mindful, remember that it's not supposed to, it's off. The top is slightly, you know, asymmetrically off. One side is a little longer than the other one. Okay, so grab your the two pieces of your top. Just remember the facing here, this is the front. So you need to match up your two back pieces. So here is one, and here is the back of my other side. And you want to start up here where the facing is. And that's where you'll start stitching. So your stitching will start over here where the interfacing is, so that you're stitching the facing as well as the back seam of the shirt. Okay, and you stitch all the way down, and you can see that it's off. So okay, and you're going to stitch all the way down to the bottom, and you can see that one side is about 2.5, 3 inches longer than the other side. That's the way it's supposed to be. I'll stop at my seam here and turn. Then just stitch all the way down. From here it says to press the seam towards the left side, which is basically the longer side. So you're going to press your seam this way towards the longer side, and just turn this extra here, turn this in and press this as well, and then they tell you to come back and just tack it a little bit. In step 17, we need to tack the seam allowance in place here at the bottom, and then also tack the facing at the shoulder seams. So, got a needle and thread here. I'll go, here's my shoulder seam, and you're just tacking this so that the facing stays in place. So just go under and just do yourself a couple little stitches. So do that at the other shoulder seam and also at the bottom edge here in the back. They don't say to do it. I don't know if there's something else that comes later in the pattern that tells you, but if it doesn't say so, I would turn this in and then tack it so that you don't have these raw edges here. So either come finish the edges, you know, with a serger or zigzag stitch or something, or just turn it in and then tack it into place so that you don't have these raw edges here. Okay, at this point, I would suggest trying it on and then making any adjustments that you need to. Okay, step 19. You're going to take sleeve 9 and they want you to just do a narrow hem at the top edge of it. So you're going to make that 5/8 of an inch narrow hem. So here is my sleeve 9. Okay, and I'll go to my ironing board and I'll turn it under about 5/8 of an inch. And then I'll come back and do the narrow hem just the same way we hemmed the shirt. Okay, I pressed it under 5/8 of an inch, and then I'll just turn it under again to get rid of the raw edges here. Turn those to the inside and stitch along the top edge here. You're stitching close to your edge. Okay, step 20, we stitch the sleeve seam, leaving it open below the large circle. So let's find this is my sleeve here, this is the top edge of it, and my seam is here. So this is my side seam because this side is folded, so my seam is over here on the other side. And so you're stitching all the way down to where you made your mark here. Like I put a little cut there, so I'll stitch to that cut. So go ahead and stitch your sleeve seam. You can see here it's kind of curved. That's the underarm. So you're stitching the inside of your arm here. The straight stitch all the way down until you get to the marking that you made, or like I said in my case, the little cut. So you're going to stop here. Okay, I'm at my cut where I made the notation for the circle, and I'll just do a back stitch. Okay, from here we move on to the left sleeve, and you're stitching the side seam here, and it says between the large and small circles. So I know there's a little circle here that we marked at the top, and then there's a circle at the bottom. So you start just shy of the edge, and then you are stitching to this circle here at the bottom. Okay, for the bottom of our sleeve where we'll be putting the cuff, you're going to turn in the seam allowances and make a narrow hem. So that would go like this. So this is our sleeve. Here's the bottom here, the bottom portion of our sleeve, and we left our opening here. So just turn it in 5/8 of an inch, roughly, because I don't necessarily measure, I eyeball. Okay, in this I'll actually go ahead and press the seam under, because what you have to do is you're going to start stitching at the bottom, you go all the way up, then you turn and go across your seam and then come back down. So we'll go ahead and turn this under a little bit. Okay, that's one side, and then you do your other sleeve. And you do the same thing. You're starting at the bottom, you stitch up all the way up here, just past your opening. So your opening is here. So go all the way up, just past it, and then cross, and then come back down. So we'll do that on both sleeves. Okay, I'll start at the bottom of one of them. I went just past where I know my opening is, and leave my needle in so that I can turn and go across. Okay, and then turn and come back down. And just keeping my raw edges in. Okay, the other side, same thing. Okay, and now step 23, we're going to gather the lower edge of the sleeve. So you just need a longer, looser stitch, and that's whatever that is for your machine. Okay, so let me change mine. 2.5 is my standard, so I'll usually take it up to about a 4 or 4.5 for gathering, but it just depends on your machine. Okay, you're just going to sew around the lower edge of your sleeve in that long stitch. Do your other sleeve. And you can see, because it's a longer, looser stitch, it starts to gather itself already. And so once we put the cuff on, you just pull the thread to adjust the gathers. Here's a little tip. Before you sew your cuff sections together, you can mark the placements of your buttonhole by just doing a little stitch with a contrasting thread. Just do a little basting stitch that you can easily take out. So if you do that little stitch first that marks the placement of your buttonhole, then that way when you sew your cuff, once your cuff is sewn, you'll still be able to see where your buttons and buttonholes go. Okay, step 24. As I'm reading this, the directions are off again a little bit. Okay, it says turn in the seam allowance on the notched edge of the interface cuff. I got that part. And then it says trim the pressed seam allowance to 3/8 of an inch. So they need you to press it. They just didn't say that. So you're going to turn in your seam allowance and press it, and then trim it to 3/8 of an inch. So here is your cuff, and they want you to take the interfaced cuff, turn in the seam allowance where the notch is. Here's your notch. Turn in the seam allowance. So 5/8 of an inch. Turn that in, press it, and then trim it. Okay, I pressed the notched edges, and then they want you to just trim it to 3/8 of an inch. And I estimate, just trim away some of the seam allowance. I know we'll need to come back and sew this. You don't want to trim off too much that you don't have enough for you to sew. So it's almost like I'm kind of cutting this in half. Okay, trim both cuffs. Now, I should have done, I'm going to put myself a little mark here. I trim this away. I want to put a little mark because I need to know where this notch is. I'm sure we'll need to know that at some point. So I will put myself a little mark so that I know where it is. Okay, and with my other cuff, if I go line them up, that'll let me know where I need to put my notch on the other one. So it would be about right here. Okay, step 25, you're stitching the cuff sections together and you leave the notched edge open. So you just stitch along the sides and the bottom. This notched edge you leave open. So I'm taking my other two cuff pieces here. Okay, I'll move that one out of the way for a second. So my notch is up here. So I'll grab my other one. Yeah, that little mark I put there letting me know where my notch is. This is how I know this is the right one. Because essentially that would be a notch. It's just that we cut it away. So I have a notch here, and here's my notch there. So I sort of line this up, and I am going to stitch along the sides and around the bottom. And do this on both cuffs. Okay, here's my notched edge. This is the part I'm going to leave open. Refer back to step 25, and that's what they're doing. You'll stitch it on the three sides here, the side, the bottom, and then back up the other side, and then we turn it and press it. One cuff, stitch the top edge left open, and do your other one. That's cuff 2. Okay, I would just trim my fabric away a little bit. As I get to the corner, I'm going to cut diagonally across. The other one, same thing. And just turn your cuffs to the right side. And here is, I have a pointer, here it is. Just don't poke too hard so that you put a hole in your fabric. Okay, but this helps you to poke out the corners. Okay, they're both turned, so now you would just go press it so that they're nice and flat. You're attached, step 27, we are attaching the cuff to the sleeve. And so you're pinning the cuff to the sleeve, so just match your notches and adjust your gathers as you need to. So turn my sleeve to the right side. Okay, and if I find my notch, okay, here's a notch here. So I'll match that up. And I'll actually turn it over this way. Turn it on the other side. Because as I'm sewing, I'll adjust the gathers. Okay. Okay, and then this edge, the edge of the placket that we just made for your sleeve, the opening at the bottom, is going to the edge of your cuff here. And come back over here. So I'll line up these two edges, and then I will just adjust my gathers to make it all fit. So just find the string where you made the gathers and pull the string, and that will adjust your gathers for you. Just don't pull too tight to where you break it. You're just making it fit the cuff. And you'll just want your gathers evenly spaced. Okay, that looks about right. Put the pin here. Then I'll come on this end and adjust this so that it all fits. Find my thread. Okay, and then you just do the same thing to the other sleeve. Okay, you want to match your ends here. And then you're just going to go you want to match your ends here. And then we'll just stitch the cuff on all the way around. Okay. All right, and we're just going to start at the end here and stitch your cuff to your sleeve, and just be careful that you are not stitching the pressed edge here. Keep your pressed edge free and out of your way. Okay, you can kind of adjust your gather some more as you're sewing. And my pressed edge here, I'm just moving that back out of my way. Okay, and you just want to make sure your ends here meet. Okay, and you just want to make sure your ends here meet. Okay, that's our second sleeve. Okay, and if I take it out, my edges meet pretty good. So it would go in like that, and then we'll end up either doing a slip stitch, or I don't know if they have a stitch that by machine. I'll see once we get to that step. But your cuff should look like this. Right? Next we'll need to trim the seam that we just created, and you're pressing the seam up towards the cuff here. And then once you do that, slip stitch the pressed edge over the seam. This is our cuff. The seam that we just created, we're just going to trim that away some, so we don't have all this extra bulky fabric here. So trim that. And I'm going to probably about, 1/4 of an inch. Same thing on the other cuff. Trim your seam allowance. And then I'll go to my ironing board, and I'm going to press my seam up towards the cuff. So it'll be up in the inside. And we will just come slip stitch the cuff over the seam here. Okay, I'll put myself a couple pins just to hold the cuff in place. And you can see you're getting it just over your seam here. Okay, I'm starting in the inside so that my knot is in the inside. And just slip stitch your cuff in place here. And I don't want to see my stitching on the other side, so I'm being careful just to pull up a little bit of the fabric and not go all the way through. So I'm going in just a little bit. And back at the other end. Let me cut off these other loose threads so that I don't make a mistake and cut the thread that I'm actually sewing with. Okay, and then if you turn it over, you can see that you don't see any of your stitching here. I'm at the end, so I'll just make sure my raw edges are tucked in and make myself a knot here. Okay, and then you will just slip stitch the other cuff the same way. To add the sleeve, you're going to stitch one of the sleeves to the right side of your shirt. And the sleeve that we're using for the right side is the sleeve that has the top stitching here. The one that we folded and did the top stitching along the upper edge. So this is a sleeve. So I have my sleeve turned to the right side, and you want to attach it to the right side of your shirt. So try it on if you need to, but I know this is my right side here. And then, like I said, you can always refer back to the pictures to kind of help you out, right? So find your right side, and we are attaching the sleeve in here. Okay, so I'm turning it this way so that I can insert my sleeve and sew it with the right sides together. Okay, I'm going to match up my seams first of all. And I can match up my notches here as close as I can. And then you would essentially be sewing to this little dot or marking or cut or whatever you put here. But that's essentially the end of your sleeve. So if you look at it from the other side, your stitching would go just up to about right here, just beyond it a little bit. Let me pin it all the way on the other side. Okay, so I'll tuck my sleeve in the inside so that you can see what I'm doing. So this is my right side. It's just that right now you're looking at the wrong side of it. And I've put my sleeve inside the armhole. And I have the sleeve that has the top stitching at the upper edge. And so I'll stitch that sleeve part of it. So I'll start here and go all the way around. And I will just stop on the other side here. Okay, and if you look at your pattern, step 29 is explaining to you how to attach the sleeve. And so how to attach the sleeve, and they're telling you to baste it and then stitch it and then stitch it again. Like I said, and stitch it again. I'm actually skipping this basting step. I've pinned it, so I'm just going to stitch it, and then I'll stitch it again in the seam allowance. So I'll do another stitching close to it, because any underarm seams, you always want to double stitch that. Okay, so I'm turning my sleeve to the right side. And then this would be the right side of my top. And I'll turn it to the wrong side here so that I can put my sleeve in and I have right sides together. So what I'll do first is find my center seam here. And remember, it's the sleeve that has the top stitching at the upper edge. That's the one that you're attaching to the right side. So I'll put my sleeve inside here. And I'll match up my center seams, or my armhole seams. So these seams here, I'll match that up first so that I know that's in place. And then we have some little notches here that match. Just match it up as best you can. And then this cut that I put here would be the end of my stitching. So I'll start stitching here just off of my sleeve. So you start here, you're going to go all the way under the arm, and then just all the way under the arm, and then just up above this other folded edge. Okay, so if you're looking at it, this is your armhole, and this part, for now, we're not doing anything with. You're just attaching the sleeve here at the bottom of it. Okay, and I'll just go past this folded edge a little bit. Okay, then just do another stitch close to that stitch. Okay, to finish up the sleeve. So if we go back to our pattern, one of the things it says you need is a ½ yard of bias tape. So 1/2 of a yard of 1/2 inch wide single fold bias tape. I didn't buy bias tape. I always just kind of cut corners because I wasn't going to buy a package of bias tape just to get a ½ yard. And I know it's to create a facing for my sleeve, so I'm just going to cut myself some basically bias tape out of the same fabric. So what I'll do, the fabric that I have, I have scrap fabric left. If you don't have fabric left and you didn't purchase bias tape, just use, you can use a muslin or some fabric that matches close enough to your top. Something that wouldn't stand out so much if a little bit of it is showing. So what I'll do is cut this on an angle, cut it diagonally, because that's how bias tape is cut, and it'll help give it some give, basically, to go around the curve of that sleeve. So if you purchase bias tape, great, you go ahead and use that, but I did not, so I will just cut a strip of fabric and use that. And it says we need half a yard, which is 18 inches. So this is roughly 18 inches here that I've cut, and I don't even think we need that much. I think it's less than ½ a yard you need, so that's why I didn't buy a package. And on the instructions, what you do, if you look at step 30, it says you open up one of the folded edges of the bias tape and press it lightly. So I'm only going to press one edge, because when you purchase bias tape, it's folded, the two edges are folded inwards, and they're telling you to press that flat. So that means I only need one pressed edge. Okay, so I'm just folding in my bias tape, or my fabric that I've created as bias tape, and I'm just pressing in one edge of it, and I'm creating about a 1/4 of an inch fold. Okay, so this is what I'll use to finish out my armhole. Step 31, you're to pin your bias tape to the rest of this armhole here, the part that we did not sew, and then you stitch it from the bottom edge here over to the edge. You're just stitching your bias tape on to the raw edges here, and then you're stopping your stitching at the folded top edge of the sleeve here. So this is how this looks. This is my bias tape I created. I am going to attach it to the raw edges here of my sleeve. This is the top of my armhole here. Go up all the way over your shoulder seam here. Okay, and I'll actually go just beyond this because I want my bias tape down in the inside here. Okay, and you'll go just to where your folded edge starts. Okay, so your sleeve is looking like this, the part that's kind of off of your arm, and then this part here goes up along your shoulder. So you're just stitching the bias tape along this top edge here. Okay, and you start your stitching just at your folded edge here. So feel for the top of your folded edge, and that's where your stitching will begin. Okay, I have a pin here because that's letting me know that that's where my top is. Okay, I have a pin here because that's letting me know where my folded top stitch edge is. And I'll start stitching there. And we're just stitching along the upper edge of the sleeve. Okay, and we're just going to go to this top edge here, the top of the folded edge. Okay, all right, we can trim the excess here, just as the pattern says. Step 32, they want you to turn the bias tape to the inside, press it, and baste it into place. And then it says to slip stitch the ends. So that would be the bottom portion of it. Then I'll come do my top stitching on the outside. And then once you get to your top folded edge, you would sew down, and then you're going to turn and pivot so that your stitching meets the top of your sleeve here. And then you would turn the bias tape to the inside, pins in here to hold it in place. And then this extra that I have over here, I'll just cut it off. So you're definitely not using a half a yard. It may be like 9 inches, which would be a fourth of a yard is really all we need of the bias tape. Okay, I'm starting just here at the top of where my folded edge is. Over and stop, and then you're going to pivot. I want you to turn. Okay, I'll take my pin out here, and you're just stitching the bias tape on, and you're just top stitching where the bias tape is. You're going to come down to where your top stitching is. Then stop about right there and just turn. And sew to your top, sew over to where you meet your top stitching. Okay, so it'll end up looking like this. This is your bias tape that we created. This is your bias tape in the inside of the armhole here. You did your top stitching along the top. And then once you got to your upper edge here, you stitch all the way down and then you turn and pivot so that the two stitching lines meet. Okay, what we have left to do, step 34, we'll mark out where our buttonholes go and sew those on, and then we'll come back and you just sew the buttons on. So you need to add your buttonholes to the front of the shirt, and then we'll also sew the buttonholes on the cuff part of it as well. And it looks like at the top opening here they have a little snap. So there's a snap you put just above the button. I guess maybe it opens up a little bit or something. And the snap will probably help it just lay flat. So we'll go add our buttonholes to the front of the shirt and our buttonholes to the cuff. And then that's just going to vary based upon your machine. The way you do it will just vary based upon your machine. Okay, and if you look at your pattern, step 29 is explaining to you how to attach the sleeve. And so how to attach the sleeve, and they're telling you to baste it and then stitch it and then stitch it again. Like I said, and stitch it again. I'm actually skipping this basting step. I've pinned it, so I'm just going to stitch it, and then I'll stitch it again in the seam allowance. So I'll do another stitching close to it, because any underarm seams, you always want to double stitch that. Okay, and I'll just go past this folded edge a little bit. and just do another stitch close to that stitch. Okay, to finish up the sleeve. So if we go back to our pattern, one of the things it says you need is a ½ yard of bias tape. So 1/2 of a yard of 1/2 inch wide single fold bias tape. I didn't buy bias tape. I always just kind of cut corners because I wasn't going to buy a package of bias tape just to get a ½ yard. And I know it's to create a facing for my sleeve, so I'm just going to cut myself some basically bias tape out of the same fabric. So what I'll do, the fabric that I have, I have scrap fabric left. If you don't have fabric left and you didn't purchase bias tape, just use, you can use a muslin or some fabric that matches close enough to your top. Something that wouldn't stand out so much if a little bit of it is showing. So what I'll do is cut this on an angle, cut it diagonally, because that's how bias tape is cut, and it'll help give it some give, basically, to go around the curve of that sleeve. So if you purchase bias tape, great, you go ahead and use that, but I did not, so I will just cut a strip of fabric and use that. And it says we need half a yard, which is 18 inches. So this is roughly 18 inches here that I've cut, and I don't even think we need that much. I think it's less than ½ yard you need, so that's why I didn't buy a package. Okay. And on the instructions, what you do, if you look at step 30, it says you open up one of the folded edges of the bias tape and press it lightly. So I'm only going to press one edge because when you purchase bias tape, it's folded, the two edges are folded inwards, and they're telling you to press that flat. So that means I only need one pressed edge. Okay, so I'm just folding in my bias tape, or my fabric that I've created as bias tape, and I'm just pressing in one edge of it, and I'm doing about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going in about 1/4 of an inch to press it, and I'm creating about 1/4 of an inch fold. Okay, so this is what I'll use to finish out my armhole. Step 31, you're to pin the bias tape to the armhole edge here, and then you stitch in a tiny seam allowance. Step 31, you're to pin your bias tape to the Step 31, you're to pin your bias tape to the extra, Step 31, you're to pin your bias tape to the rest of this armhole. Step 31, you're to pin your bias tape to the rest of this armhole here, the part that we did not sew. And then it says the part that we did not sew, and then you stitch it from the bottom edge here over to the edge here. So you're just going to stitch your bias tape on to where you meet the folded edge. So you're just stitching your bias tape on to the raw edges here, and then you're stopping your stitching at the folded top edge of the sleeve here. So this is how this looks. This is my bias tape I created. I am going to attach it to the raw edges here of my sleeve. This is the top of my armhole here. Go up all the way over your shoulder seam here. Okay, and I'll actually go just beyond this because I want my bias tape down in the inside here. Okay, and then you will just go, and okay, and then you'll go just to where your folded edge starts. Okay, so your sleeve is looking like this. This would be the part that's kind of off your shoulder. This is the part that's on the top of your shoulder. This is the part that's kind of off of your arm. This is the part that's kind of off of your arm, and then this part here goes up along your shoulder. So you're just stitching the bias tape along this top edge here. Okay, and you start your stitching just at your folded edge here. So feel for the top of your folded edge, and that's where your stitching will begin. Okay, I have a pin here because that's letting me know that that's where my top is. Okay, I have a pin here because that's letting me know where my folded top stitch edge is. And I'll start stitching there. And we're just stitching along the upper edge of the sleeve. Okay, and we're just going to go to this top edge here, the top of the folded edge. Okay. All right, we can trim our seam allowance here. Okay, all right, we can trim the excess here, just as the pattern says. And then you would turn the bias tape to the inside. I'll put a couple pins in here to hold it in place. And then this extra that I have over here, I'll just cut it off. So you're definitely not using a half a yard. It may be like 9 inches, which would be a fourth of a yard is really all we need of the bias tape. So I'm sure I probably would have used it if I bought it, but I'm sure I probably would have used it on another project if I had bought it, but it's okay, I didn't really need it. And I'm sure if I had purchased the bias tape, I could always use it on another project. So if you bought it, you know, just hang on to the extra. And if you did buy the bias tape, you'll just have extra for next. And if you did buy the bias tape, you just have some for the next time you use it. You'll just have some for the next time you'll need it. And if you did buy the bias tape, you'll just have some for the next time you may need it. Okay, this is turned to the inside. I think they want you to slip stitch it. Let's see. So 32, turn the bias tape to the inside, press it, baste it in place, and then slip stitch the ends. So I'm not basting, I'll turn it to the inside, I'll press it, and then they want you to stitch it on the outside close to the edge that you basted. So if you base it, then they want you to stitch it on the outside. And then they want you to stitch it on the outside. And once you get to the sleeve, you would kind of turn and pivot. Then they want you to stitch it on the outside. And once you get to your folded edge here, they want you to turn and pivot. Okay. They want you to turn the bias tape to the inside, press it, and then base it. Press it and then baste it into place. Okay, step 32, they want you to turn the bias tape to the inside, press it, and baste it into place. And then it says to slip stitch the ends. So that would be the bottom portion of it. We'll go over that. And then they want you to slip stitch the ends, which would be down here. But I'm not basting it. I'll press it, I'll slip stitch my ends, and then on the outside they want you to stitch it. So we'll do a top stitch, and so I'm going to turn, so I'll turn it in and press it into place, and then I will come do my top stitching on the outside here. And the way you're doing it, they want you to top stitch, so you're sewing along, and then I'll come do my top stitching on the outside. And then once you get to your top folded edge, you would sew down, and then you're going to turn and pivot so that your stitching meets the top of your sleeve here. On the inside here at the bottom of my sleeve at the bottom of my bias tape, I'm just going to turn the end under. Just tuck it under so that I have no raw edges. And then I'll put myself a pin there. Put it on the outside because I'll be sewing on the outside. And then I'll go do the same thing at the other end. So where my bias tape ends, I'll just fold it up so that I have no raw edges. And then you're to slip stitch this part into place. And I don't think the pattern says to fold it up. That's just what I'm doing because I don't want the raw edges. The pattern says just to slip stitch it into place. But if the raw edges would bother you, because they would bother me, and I don't think the pattern says to do that. It says just to slip stitch it into place. So it's completely up to you. I'm just choosing to turn under my raw edges, and then I'll stitch the top of it. I'm just choosing to turn under my raw edges before I sew it down. Okay, I'm starting just here at the top of where my folded edge is. Come over and stop, and then you're going to pivot. They want you to turn. And I'll actually get my sleeve, my armhole inside and actually put my sewing machine arm inside the armhole so that I make sure it's all out of my way. Okay, I'll take my pin out here, and you're just stitching the bias tape on, and you're just top stitching where the bias tape is. You're going to come down to where your top stitching is, and stop about right there and just turn, and sew to your top, sew over to where you meet your top stitching. Okay, so it'll end up looking like this. This is your bias tape that we created. This is your bias tape in the inside of the armhole here. You did your top stitching along the top. And then once you got to your upper edge here, you stitch all the way down, and then you turn and pivot so that the two stitching lines meet. We are almost done. For the left side, so we just need to put the sleeve in on the left side, and then we just need to put the sleeve in on the left side. And so you're just matching your armhole seams. We just need to put the sleeve in on the left side, and it says you break your stitching at the small circles. So you're not stitching in a continuous circle like you would normally with the sleeve. You'll start at one end and stitch all the way around and then stop, just like they have it here. Okay, this is the left side of our shirt. Here's our armhole. I am taking my sleeve that's left, and I've turned it to the right side, and I will just put it inside the armhole here. Same thing, I want to find my center seam and get those kind of lined up. And I'll find my top shoulder seam. So for the shoulder, I put a little cut here so that I would know where it was. So if you put a cut or a marking or whatever, you need to match that up to your shoulder seam. And you can see they had a stitch up to a circle here and stop. So that's the reasoning why you can't stitch all the way around in a continuous armhole. Okay, just match everything up as best as you can. Okay. So I will start stitching here, and I will stitch all the way around, and I'll stop here because it says you're to stop your stitching at your circle here. Okay, I'll slide the arm of my machine into my armhole again. And you see, okay, and you see how okay, and I'll get, you know, as close as I can to that circle, and then I'll stop. And that is it for the armhole. Okay, what we have left to do, step 34, we'll mark out where our buttonholes go and sew those on, and then we'll come back and you just sew the buttons on. So you need to add your buttonholes to the front of the shirt, and then we'll also sew the buttonholes on the cuff part of it as well. And it looks like at the top opening here they have a little snap. So there's a snap you put just above the button. I guess maybe it opens up a little bit or something. And the snap will probably help it just lay flat. So we'll go add our buttonholes to the front of the shirt and our buttonholes to the cuff. The way you do it will just vary based upon your machine. For my cuff, I didn't transfer little markings here with a stitch or anything for my buttonholes, and I rarely do. So I usually just kind of put them where I want it. But what you can do is just take out your pattern tissue and lay it over your cuff. This little circle here would be at the seam, and just sort of estimate a seam allowance. Then you can put little markings knowing that your buttonholes would go here. Okay, so I'll pin this on to my cuff for a second. Then I'll just fold the pattern tissue up so that I can still see the line, but the paper's out of my way. Then I know my buttonholes will go here, here, and here. So normally you could, before you sew your cuff on, okay, so that's for the cuff, and you do the same cuff, the other cuff, you do the other cuff the same way. And then for my shirt, the front part of it, if I open up my interface and I can see my little markings here, to let me know how spaced out my buttonholes should be. And then I'll just come over, you know, I'll put a pin there. So I'll put a pin here, and then I'll turn it over on the other side. And I usually just start my buttonholes about 1/4 inch from the outside edge. So my buttonhole would go right here and about 1/4 inch away from the edge all the way up. So just go mark out the placement of your buttonholes, and then we'll sew all of those. For my machine, I'll switch my stitch to 35 for the buttonhole. Like I said, that's going to vary based upon your machine. So right now I'm at 0, 20, 30, 35. And then my button would go here, and then I slide this down to secure my button in place. Then I want to, and I've taken my other presser foot off, and I will just add my buttonhole foot. Okay, and then there's also a little lever here on my machine that I need to slide down behind this little hook there. Okay, lift that, and then I want my thread to come from underneath. So I'll just turn my hand wheel so that I have my thread under. Okay. And I always like to do a practice buttonhole just in case my machine is doing something crazy or it's not working properly. I can do it on a scrap of fabric. And this one, my buttonhole foot here, depending on, like I said, it's different depending upon your machine. So the way this machine does buttonholes, it starts here and it stitches backwards. And so it won't be coming forward. My buttonhole, I'm going to start here and it will go backwards. drops on its own when it's done. And I'm good with that one. So now I'll go actually make them on my shirt. So I know I want all my buttonholes approximately 1/4 of an inch from the outside edge. So I've gone through and just marked out where 1/4 of an inch is from the edge. I have my marking here for the buttonhole. That's the placement of it, and this is where it would start or stop. So I have one more up here. I'll just put a pin here letting me know that that's where I'm starting my buttonhole. Okay, so I've done that all the way down. And now I'll go to my machine and I'll put it in this way so that I know this is my starting point, and the machine will make the buttonhole as big as it needs to. Okay, that's centered. I'll drop that. Okay, and remove my pin here. That's one. I think we have 10 more to go because I think the pattern called for 11 buttons. So you have 10 more buttonholes. Do all of this, and then we also have to do the buttonholes for the cuff. I tried it on, and what I'm noticing is that I couldn't necessarily get this back part, the back of it, to lay exactly flat the way that I wanted it. So what I'm going to do is just open up the facing part of it. So if you find that you're having that problem, maybe it's just me, but here's a solution for it if you have the same issue. Because I found just stitching it straight up, like they said, once I laid it down, it didn't lay flat. So I opened up the facing, and then that way it lays nice and flat. So basically my machine stitching will end at the facing, and then I'll fold the facing down and just slip stitch this into place so that it lays nice and flat on the outside here.